Hear ye, come one and all. Join us for a free introductory journey through occult theory and practice. Learn dazzling mysteries, occult sciences, and powerful spells. Heal the sick, curse your enemies, and attract the favor of that sexy human next door. All this can be yours absolutely free. All we ask is that you tune in every other week. Learn what you can and put it into practice. Some side effects may include stress relief, a new outlook on life, and a newfound obsession with small shiny objects. Tune in today.
The occult arts discussed after this disclaimer are a product of 60,000 or so years of collective human experimentation with spiritual matters. Ask your doctor, mental health professional, and/or forward-thinking religious leader if the occult arts are right for you. When they tell you that it's not entirely based on science and that you should be very careful when experimenting the way that your brain operates, shout hogwash and fling your arms up in the air before storming out of the office while reciting the Scottish play on your way back to your preferred form of transit. Always remember, harm none, do what thou wilt.
Disclaimer. Please do not actually yell hogwash at your doctor, mental health professional, and or forward-thinking religious leader. They only want what's best for you, like we do. We love you.
Disclaimer. I do not love you.
Welcome to the Fool's Guide to the Occult. I'm Hector.
I'm Tyler.
And I'm Kevin.
This is our very first episode, so we're going to establish some common language, explore some good background concepts, and talk about how each of us got involved in this to begin with. But before we get started, I'd like to throw down a statement of intent for the entire podcast series. It is our will to create a series whereby the listener to each episode in sequence can go from a non-practicing individual of casual interest to a practicing and well-functioning occultist if they so choose. While we're going to provide you with a lot of information in this podcast, starting pretty fundamental and working towards more complex topics, we're also going to provide exercises that you may integrate into your practice so that you can begin walking the path.
So, to kick things off, let's throw the bones.
My bones!
Looks good. All right. The circle is cast and closed, and it's time to dig in.
All
Awesome.
right. So, what is the occult? To tackle that big question, like what really is the occult, we kind of have to define a couple terms first. So there are terms like arcane, which means only known to a select few. There's esoteric, which means information designed to be only known by initiated groups, like secret societies or I don't know, secret government organizations or something like that.
Sure.
There's
Awesome.
There's also occult, which is knowledge that is hidden or paranormal.
So really all religious information could fall into this category.
Yeah, absolutely. So go tell your local religious leader that. The occult primarily focuses on information cast out of the mainstream religions and sciences. So it's often a term used to describe spiritual systems or practices cast out of dominant culture.
There's some irony here in that throughout history, the highest profile people in society have often, usually secretly, taken part in occult research, rituals, and practices. Edward Kelly, John Dee, Nostradamus, the Romanovs of Russia employed many occultists, and frauds and lunatics like Rasputin. About a tenth of Sir Isaac Newton's writings are on the topic of alchemy. There are extensive memberships of American constitutional framers in secret societies. The list goes on and on and on.
Yeah, we really just can't avoid being curious about our taboos.
Speaking of taboos, here's a thing to play with this week. Try violating social norms just for fun, but, be safe and be sure not to do anything that violates anyone's personal safety or autonomy or so forth.
Yeah, try to keep it legal.
Legal-ish.
Yeah.
Stuff that
Let's
fits
talk about-
into the category of occult.
Yeah, what does fit into that category?
How about magic, divination, so telling the future, learning things about the present, paranormal investigation, remote viewing, astral travel, alchemy.
Yeah, speaking of like secret government stuff, check out stuff on remote viewing. That shit's crazy.
Yeah, Ingo Swann. He's the guy to look into for that, and like some people in the FBI maybe still use it. I don't know.
Sure.
All right, let's so we've got some basic definitions of the topic of the series. Let's dig into our personal backgrounds just a little bit. Tyler, you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. So I'm going to be upfront and say that I'm probably the closest to a dilettante in this group. Basically, I am very interested in this topic, and I'm interested in learning more about this topic. But going into this, I'm going to know the least. My background is mostly just Jewish and Christian, non-religious upbringing. I've tried reading The Golden Bough twice on multiple occasions. It's a slog, guys. I'm sorry.
That's
Uh,
being generous.
yeah, that's it was written before like people really cared about what they read. Um, my background's mostly in history I would say in secret societies. Me being a member of the Ancient Free and Accepted Masons, of which I am a master mason. Um,
Illuminati.
yeah. Uh, Turns out that was a real thing. We'll get to that eventually. Um, Also, I mostly got into the concept of chaos magic through Hector, who I'll now toss it to.
Hello. Hey, before I take the helm there, Tyler, what region of the world are you tuning in?
Uh, I'd say most of my background is in European, Middle Eastern, and Asian history, and sort of the interplay between all of those.
All right. Great.
Globalism.
Yeah, global
Wonderful.
history.
Sounds good.
Yeah,
All right. I was pretty much raised non-religious until like the age of 9. Kind of grew up on my grandparents' old farmland, and then when my mom got remarried, she married a Catholic guy. So um, I kind of got like converted to Catholicism for a few years, but I dropped off around like I don't know, age 12 or 13, and kind of found the occult at that time. Interestingly, the same time I started using cannabis. So I don't know if
that,
there's a correlation there, but
yeah, that
maybe.
doesn't sound like an accident.
No, not really. I was initially interested in Wicca when I got started on the craft, but then a couple years later, I got more into ceremonial magic. By the time I got to college, I was still interested in all that stuff, but I also got interested in Buddhism, Zen Buddhism specifically. And then after trying psychedelics for the first time, I got really interested in shamanism and the spiritual use of psychoactive substances. Few years after that, I got real involved in some political work and sort of dropped out of the spiritual realm for a few years, mostly focusing on radical politics, social justice work, and working with like educating kids. And then I've recently kind of returned to occultism with a pretty solid interest in chaos magic. And to some degree, the tenets of LaVey's brand of Satanism, although I wouldn't consider myself specifically a practitioner of Satanism, but I really do like some of the ideas found therein.
Awesome.
There
Yeah,
is some interesting stuff in Levian Satanism, which we will get to. We will.
definitely, definitely.
Mhm. I would also like to point out that there is a non ignorable correlation seems like in your background between I would say drug use and interest in the occult. That's something that I think we should explore
I
eventually.
I think we'll probably do. It'll probably turn into a short series. Actually, I don't think we can condense it into one episode, but we should. We definitely need to talk about psychoactive substances, brain consciousness, human evolution, and shamanism and the occult, and how all those things are sort of part of the same web.
Awesome.
And they
Can't
are.
wait.
Yeah,
So for me, I was brought up Jewish, quite Jewish. I was brought up relatively religious. I never really experienced a crisis of belief in a singular higher power per se. Like I never had that moment of God is dead and everything is terrible. I really just never bought into it from the beginning. I'm not into the concept of the Judeo-Christian higher power, and that's fine. You can still be super Jewy and not believe in God. Turns out that's a thing.
Jews are cool
I've
like that.
always there's a bunch of Jewish identified atheists. It's kind of a nifty little movement. But I've always been fascinated by observations on the power of mass ritual and ceremony. And that was something that growing up around religion definitely exposed me to. From early high school, I experimented with personal ritual in tandem with ongoing Jewish practice. Um, a lot of kind of edgelordy stuff with blood and iron and sex and crystals and geometry. As I moved out of high school and into college, I got into some LaVeyan Satanism. I got into the Principia Discordia,
Woo!
but not so much belief. Still not so much the belief. Still really a skeptic down to my bones. I am the Pope, as all Discordians will tell you. I am the Pope, and practiced in the fine art of communication via pineal gland with the goddess Eris. I have a particular appreciation for the politics of the Church of Satanism. I love how humanistic they are. I love how they interact with the people around them. It's a fascinating byplay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's a little too bad that the media chooses to focus just on like the statues and stuff like that when it comes to the Church of Satanism.
It
Hey, it's
is,
all
but
about selling the media, you know?
it's a
Yeah.
skeptical narrative and whatever it is. I took about 10 years off of most occult study and practice, but you just don't forget some stuff. I'm not going to claim expertise, but I've done some nifty stuff that sometimes worked. And because I think that magic is accessible to anybody who wants to study and practice, I don't think you need more than a desire to participate and a commitment to kind of jump in. And that's enough.
hmm It's sort of a low ante kind of belief system.
It is. And I'm that kind of dyed in the wool skeptic, doubting, everything. And it still works for me.
hmm
Great. Hey, I think that brings us to the point where it's time for a brief interlude.
An interlude, you say?
An
An interlude.
interlude?
Today's episode is brought to you by the Five of Pentacles. Five of Pentacles symbolizes Taurus, right side up, loss of cash, trouble with concerning material things or work, but also the knowledge of earthly things. Reversed, the Five of Pentacles symbolizes money regained after hard work, determination, or being obstinate.
Man, sounds like me after my tax return. Am I right, guys?
And before your tax return. Really, it
Yeah,
just sounds like you with or without your tax return.
yeah. It just sounds like pretty much anyone.
It does.
All right, so let's dive into some other terms under the umbrella of the occult, shall we?
Okay.
All right, so let's talk about magic. I feel like a lot of our show is going to end up talking about magic in one way or another. So, to differentiate between magic with a C, such as magic performed for entertainment, like David Blaine or Dan Sperry or Chris Angel, that kind of
Boo.
thing. Yeah. And magic with a CK that is spiritual in nature, we add a K to the end to what we call real magic
Yeah,
or
the
spiritual magic rather than parlor tricks.
the
hmm
K is important.
Special K.
Yeah. In the future, always assume that we're putting the hard K sound at the end of the word, even if it doesn't always come through in the audio. If we're talking about the other form of magic, we're going to spell it out for you guys.
We'll refer to it as lowercase magic.
Lowercase magic. That's a good way of
Lowercase
putting it.
magic. An important note, some people refer to the practice of magic as the craft. In this instance, we do not replace the C with a K. That is both trademarked and too much dairy for me.
hmm
Well, let's try and define magic, shall we? A definition is a little more difficult to tease out as magic has been practiced longer than recorded history. Modern humans, Homo sapiens, have been on the earth for about somewhere between 40 and 60,000 years. Recorded Western history is approximately 4,500 years old. So if we pick the middle number, 5,000 or 50,000 years, and do the division, we've been recording information in written form for about 9% of our total existence on this planet. And even after that, we've burned or allowed to be locked away more than half of the information and knowledge we've ever produced. The cool thing about this is that basically every culture worldwide has practiced some form of magic, and there's a deep, rich history of practice in each one to dive into.
Okay, so magic has been around for a long time, longer than we can ever really measure. So let's work on pinning down what it is.
All right. Well, let's start with some references. According to the Wiccan author Scott Cunningham, magic is often a movement of personal power for a specific goal. Church of Satan founder Anton Szandor LaVey wrote that magic is the change in situations or events in accordance with one's will, which would usually, using normally accepted methods, be unchangeable.
Okay. We'll go into, again, the Church of Satan, Satanism, probably even a bit about the Satanic Panic at one point. But really, dear listener, you should check out the last podcast on the left episodes about these things, because they put in a ton of time and effort and made a really good, comprehensible, and enjoyable segment on that
Love
material.
those guys. Yeah.
Absolutely love last podcast. All right, going further. According to chaos magician and author of Condensed Chaos, Phil Hine, magic is a set of techniques and approaches which can be used to extend the limits of achievable reality.
Chiefs.
And if we go on to Donald Michael Krieg, who wrote Modern Magic, which is basically about ceremonial magic, it's important to note that no one can give you magical powers. You have to earn them. There's only one way to do this, and that's practice, practice, practice.
Insert Carnegie Hall joke here. Right.
And that's
Honestly,
why.
learning
Oh,
to
go ahead.
practice.
Yeah.
Sorry, yeah. Learning to practice is just half the battle on its own. If you can discipline yourself, you've gained a serious amount of personal power and autonomy right there, and that might be the most real magic there is.
True
Outside of
that.
friendship. Yes.
Right.
Aw.
The
Yeah.
friends we
And that's
met
why
along
we're
the
giving
way.
you stuff in each episode to kind of take back and practice yourself. That gives you, something related to this that you can really dig into.
Now, if it sounds like a lot of these definitions kind of have a similarity where the definition is where magic is the employment of a variety of techniques and practices that permit the harnessing of one's psycho-spiritual energy to alter perceivable reality in accordance with the will of the practitioner.
That's a word salad.
Yeah,
Let's
if
break
that's
that
the
on
definition
down.
we're working off for now, we should take that with a grain of salt and keep in mind that there are a whole bunch of different models of magic that one can operate under and even interchange between.
Definitely.
Mhm.
I want to start by addressing the psychological model, where a practitioner uses a symbol or ritual or whatever icons of significance to condition their own unconscious to work towards their objective without any active direction.
This one, or sorry, this is one interpretation of sigil magic and servitors in chaos magic. Some Satanists also subscribe to this model, though not all do.
This is my preferred model, my preferred framework when I'm having a capital S skeptical day. Like some days you don't really believe in unmeasurable phenomena, but this model relies on manipulating functions of the brain that modern science doesn't really understand yet. There is a lot about the brain that we don't understand yet, that even when I'm being a good scientist and disbelieving phenomena without measurable proof, I can dig into the psych model with no real hesitation because we truly just don't know if it's true or not yet. I'm participating in research by trying to make my brain do flips and change the universe, as long as I document what I do and try to reproduce it.
Yeah, we should probably put in a disclaimer here. This is a model that you should be very careful with. Mostly because I think it's probably one of the easiest to do. If you do manage to gain access to your brain's, operating system, you gotta be ready to deal with whatever the ramifications of that are.
Yeah, and I think it depends on how deep you go with it. Some people use this model only on like the basis of placebo effect or forms of emotional release. But yeah, if you start screwing around with your psychological functioning, be really careful. This is why I don't advocate reckless use of psychedelic substances.
All right, onward, ever onward. Let's talk about the informational model, which I, not gonna lie, do not understand.
My understanding of it is baseline, and this is what I got for you. Energy is dumb and information lacks energy. So you have to put the two of them together to get results. And we'll do more research, but basically that's what I got so far.
Okay, we don't have a ton of grounding in this one. We'll continue to explore something about underlying matrices. We'll get back to you on this one,
Sounds sort of like smart energy or something like that.
or smartification of energy.
Whoa.
Yeah. All right. The spirit model is one wherein the practitioner conveys their desires to spirits, helpers, anima, loa, whatever, who perform the actual work of magic on the practitioner's behalf in the practitioner's interest.
Yeah, so offerings to other powers, i.e., Loa or nature spirits or ghosts or thought forms, whatever you want to commune with. I believe this specific practice is referred to as petitioning.
It's
If I'm
because
not
nature spirits
mistaken.
hate a mooch, is all
hmm
we're saying.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but this sounds kind of similar to the psychological model from earlier. If you so desire, you could say that it's just the psychological model, but with using spirits and anima and whatnot instead of parts of your own self.
We're just declaring that you have a dissociated identity that's capable of practicing whatever you're trying to get it to do.
hmm
Yeah, so either you invoke a historic god or deity or something that you actually believe in, or you take the route of one of the characters in The Invisibles and invoke John Lennon because he basically has all the attributes of a god this day and
hmm
age.
Or like George
Yes, I believe
Washington
in
Carver.
chaos magic that's known as something called evoking. It's a very
Uh,
cool concept.
and it's pretty much throughout all of Magic.
Okay, and one last model to touch on, which we kind of already have. The energy model is really the big umbrella wherein a practitioner manipulates their own internal energy, bioelectricity or chi or whatever you want to call it, to achieve their objectives, as we've mentioned above.
Sort of that psycho spiritual energy that we were discussing earlier.
Exactly.
hmm Now, these models don't see magic as an external force, but related to more probability, mindset, and creating assumptions of success. Sometimes the mechanism for impacting the world is the application of internal spiritual power, but can also be entirely psychological and rooted in the ability of the brain to do things sort of on its own when properly conditioned.
In my own personal practice and experience, magic has a lot to do with probability and mindset and creating those assumptions of success. So yes, magic is the practice of manipulating the world to produce effects that suit the practitioner, but the practitioner is also part of the world and must also be manipulated. So I think this has more to do with the concept of building a frame or system to effect during the ritual, like building a frame of reference in physics, things like that. Uh, and in this case, that frame of reference includes, for me, includes myself. So my own rituals have been designed with the philosophy of seeding change where the ritual changes me. And from that change, the rest of the world is dragged along for the ride and enacts whatever change that I'm attempting to make. So I operate with the core assumption that if adequate belief in some hypothetical truth can be generated, that change will come about.
Yeah,
And
in
the
other words, it's Kevin's world. We all just live in it.
exactly, a little bit of solipsism carries you a long way. But
hmm
the only person that I can, with 100% efficacy, change the beliefs of is me.
And that's pretty powerful stuff. That's also very chaos magician of you.
Yeah, accidental chaos magician Kevin G. Fantastic.
hmm
So, with sufficient drive and charisma and certainty imparted by whatever ritual I've enacted, other people, and therefore, as I mentioned, the world absolutely will follow along. Good ritual, for me, erases doubt on the part of the practitioner. So selectively closing my own mind to the possibility that something I want isn't likely to happen leaves success as the only option. And there is power in a carefully closed mind. If I can manipulate my own doubt, manipulating the doubts of others is much easier because people can suss out a true believer. And if I can decide on the fly what I truly believe, then the doubts of other people sort of crumble away.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Also, I absolutely want to touch on the spot where you talk about power of a carefully closed mind at some point in a future episode. I think that touches on some very important aspects of the occult as well as mundane life that I think get ignored probably more often than they should.
I agree. I think belief and disbelief are both resources that can fuel rituals and fuel changes. And the opposite of belief is not disbelief. The opposite of belief is doubt. And the opposite of disbelief is also doubt.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if you guys remember earlier, but we were really referring to ourselves as skeptics when it came to a lot of this stuff. I think that skepticism is a very powerful thing, and in the sense that it controls belief and disbelief, especially when it comes to, occult stuff.
I'm also going to float the idea of being a cynic in addition to being a skeptic. People can
Interesting.
be manipulated. And as a result
Yeah,
of that absolute certitude, if I can manipulate myself, I can manipulate other people. And other
Hmm.
people generate belief, and belief enacts ritual.
Yeah, it sounds
yeah.
like something from a Terry Pratchett novel.
A little bit. Terry Pratchett meets Terry Goodkind.
Touching on the idea of like being manipulated or manipulating others, I think it's really important just to like as a side note because we're talking about like a lot of occult stuff and the occult tends to also circle around the concept of cults and cults
Hmm.
take in a lot of people and manipulate them.
Mm.
Uh I think, as unfortunate as that is, it's really important for people to learn some of the tactics of occult leaders or cult leaders and politicians and con artists and how people go about manipulating others in order to protect themselves from being manipulated.
We will
Hmm.
definitely
And
have a
remember,
future episode on that, and we will apply an ethical framework to it so that those techniques can also be used constructively.
Yeah.
mhm. And remember, you can only trust us when it comes to cults, okay? Don't listen to anybody else when it comes to that.
Only
Just
us.
us, okay? Anybody else is lying.
We'll teach you a
Just no
chant at the
lie.
end. You get a special bathrobe with a nifty bit of embroidery on it. It'll be great.
Oh man, it's like a smoking jacket.
Ooh.
Yes,
Are we
it
selling cigars to
is.
go with those?
We
They're
are.
they're wink wink cigars.
They are.
They're only legal in a couple states.
Yeah.
All right,
Onward.
I think our next topic is sympathetic magic. And basically the idea there is like things have similar effects. So if something has been connected or it is similar, it'll have a similar effect. And that'll make more sense as we kind of go through this. So this idea seems to have kind of first been formally explained in the Golden Bough by James Fraser, which Tyler, I believe you mentioned earlier. The
Almost reading
idea
it.
is that taking two separate concepts and linking them together in the practitioner's mind and using some kind of commonality as a sort of metaphysical link. These commonalities can be shape, size, color, name, whatever kind of binds the two things together in a useful way.
Hmm. I don't know if some people out there are more of a nerdier persuasion, but there's this really cool book called The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss, I want to say, where essentially it describes sympathetic magic in a really like cool and approachable and kind of functional way. It's pretty neat.
Huh, that's cool. I'll have to check that out.
Nice.
Uh, going back to Raymond Buckland, and I guess one of the reasons why I'm going to reference this guy a lot is his book. I mentioned earlier, when I got into the occult, I got into witchcraft, and Raymond Buckland's book, The Complete Book of Witchcraft, is the first book on the occult I ever read. Now, granted, I'd looked at some total BS on the internet before that,
We've all
but
looked at some total BS on the internet.
Mm-hmm.
most of what's on the internet. But anyway, so this book is actually a good primer. And so this is what he had to say about sympathetic magic. If a life-sized clay model of a bison was made and then attacked and killed, then a hunt of a real bison would also end in a kill. Religio magic ritual was born when one of the cavemen threw a skin and antlered mask and played the role of the hunting god and directing the attack. There still is in existence cave paintings of such rituals, together with spear stabbed clay models of bison and bear.
Mm-hmm.
So this gives us tools like voodoo dolls, wax dolls, the use of mandrake roots, and other things that represent other things when we're doing magic.
Really, this is the foundation uh, of any magic that uses a small thing to represent a big thing, or one thing to affect another thing. Anytime one thing is impacting another thing and they're not like in direct touching connection, this is really a lot of that theory work.
Now, all right, just to dive deep a little bit further into this, what exactly is it that makes that connection between the two things? Is it sort of the belief of the practitioner, or is it sort of, I don't know, just some other metaphysical thing?
It could
I
be
think that
any number of things.
Yeah, that really depends on what model you're operating under, and I think there's some people that would go as far to try and correlate. Oh, what is that concept from quantum physics?
Oh,
Shoot,
entanglement?
Entanglement, yeah.
yeah, the theory of entanglement, and try and use that as a similarity here. But it really depends on what system you're operating under, I think.
For me,
Oh, yeah.
again, playing mostly with psych model, if I can imagine a connection, that's usually sufficient.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Oh, man. And speaking of, like, we got to cover quantum theory at some point because that is some spooky, spooky nonsense.
I
Yeah,
don't know if I would
I'm
use the word nonsense for quantum theory.
It's
You, all right.
some spooky stuff. Let's leave
It
it at
is.
that. I think that would be a great segment to dive into right around the time we do all the psychedelic stuff. And there's this book I want to get to reading, hopefully before we do that, called The Tao of Physics by Friedrich Capra, and it's a correlation between Taoism and physics. And there's also this book that Tenzin Gyatso, the current Dalai Lama, wrote with the help of a physicist that correlates Tibetan Buddhism with quantum physics, which would be
That
really
sounds
cool to
pretty
touch
cool.
on there too.
Awesome. And once we get into that, we can start getting into string theory and multiple dimensions. And oh, man, it's so cool.
It is, but let's
Uh,
stay on sympathetic magic for a moment. I want to break it down a little further.
all
All
right,
right.
all right, all right. So, according to this book, The Anthropology of Religion, Magic, and Witchcraft, the third edition is the copy I have. I believe there's a fourth edition now by Rebecca and Philip Stein. There are two components to sympathetic magic. There's the law of similarity and the law of contagion.
Okay, so the law of similarity states basically that things that are similar are basically the same. So if a thing is similar to another thing, then the one thing can be used to affect the other thing.
Does that mean that my foot is your foot?
It's a foot.
Oh shit.
In a metaphysical sense, yes.
All right, all right.
All right, let's step to the second one. The law of contagion states that things that were once in contact continue to be connected after the connection is severed.
Now,
So, sorry, go
this
ahead.
brings my mind a little bit too closely to homeopathy to be too comfortable. Yeah.
Homeopathy is a fascinating example here because homeopathy is bullshit.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there is no way that serial titration of a particle of duck liver will help cure the common cold. No matter how many times you dilute it, that's just not going to happen.
But it does remind me back to the quantum entanglement theory.
Sure.
There's also that old phrase, a hair of the dog that bit you,
Yep.
which again, that kind of thinking is kind of dangerous, but that's where that phrase came from. They thought, if you got bit by a dog and you got contracted some disease from it, you had to make a potion that contained the hair of the dog that bit you.
Notably, this did not have a lot of historical success in curing rabies.
Yeah, neither did the vampiric panic in the United States have a lot of you know curative relationships towards the diseases that were actually causing
Porphyria, a
people to
few
die.
others.
Yeah,
Yeah,
turns out it's
tuberculosis.
just consumption.
Yep.
Just plain old run of the mill cholera. Yeah, I mean, it just seems like there's some part of like the human brain that just seems like it's really good at just assigning significance to similarities. And that kind of leads to the importance of personal objects like blood and hair and fingernails and stuff like that.
Sure. The wise magician must have excellent personal grooming. You don't leave bits of yourself anywhere for folks to find it. You gotta think Gattaca. You gotta live that Gattaca night.
Yeah, talking to you, Alan Moore.
All right. Does that bring us to our next section?
It does.
All
Yep,
right.
looks like it.
Cool. So we're talking about solitary versus group practice. And the difference here, I mean, it seems obvious.
Seems.
Mhm.
So, in my experience, most people seem to be solitary practitioners, though there are plenty of groups out there. And I actually know a few people who are like primarily solitary Wiccans, but then they'll like get together with other Wiccans for major Sabbats, but are, primarily solitary.
I think that there might be a bit of confirmation bias here because all of three of us are individual practitioners, and there may just be covens all over the place. I have a couple of friends that are more involved in group practice, similar to how organized religions operate, just on a smaller scale. Although there are, of course, personal practices that people do in their own homes, both in occultism and in religion. So it's kind of a
Yeah, that's
microcosm of that.
absolutely fair. Yeah,
Mhm.
definitely.
And that sounds like something we can explore. Not just is group magic just a bunch of individuals, or is it something else entirely?
Or is it both?
Oh shit!
Right?
Yeah, so it's completely doable to be a 100% solitary practitioner that never works with others. That said, it's also good to compare notes with other people that are practicing magic, and I think next week we'll touch on some other reasons why.
We'll also talk more about keeping notes shortly, but you should definitely be keeping notes.
Seriously, guys, magic is like 80% taking notes.
Like, if you take notes, you'll pass the test, kids. It's good for encoding. All right, let's touch on a couple other things real fast before we get into our thing you're going to practice this week. So, there are a whole bunch of other things other than magic that are under the umbrella of cultism. And we kind of touched on some before, but for example, we're just going to run through a smattering of ideas here. We have divining the future or asking otherworldly advice using things like runes or tarot or talking boards like the Ouija, mediums, automatic writing, tea leaf reading, and so on.
Sure.
Mhm.
Entrails.
Yeah, sure.
Maybe skip
Looking
the
at
entrails.
clouds. Why not? We got
Entrails are a mess.
palmistry, astrology.
We got alchemy, which is, as a lot of you probably already know, turning base metals into gold, seeking eternal life, and so forth. Which is pretty cool because it's basically the predecessor of modern chemistry and science.
It's sort of the dickish predecessor, though. Like, now we're content with fancy alloys of steel and cheap polyester, but alchemists were all like, unlimited riches and eternal life or bust.
That was when science was a lot more foppish than it is
Foppish,
today.
definitely.
Yeah, I mean, I gotta say, I'm not super happy with polyester clothing. It's all natural fibers for me.
Sure.
Plastic is no good for forging and welding.
No, it
You want to
ignites
be
and turns into its own fuel. It's not
permanently
ideal.
clothed. Yeah, it's no bueno.
No bueno.
Other stuff, we got the mystery schools, which we'll definitely talk about some of them in the future. We'll probably have to do whole episodes on different ones because it's so deep. We got secret societies, of which I'm sure you, dear listeners, can think of many.
Quite a few.
everything under the umbrella of the paranormal, like ghosts, demons, extrasensory perception, that stuff will probably be talked about in passing periodically. We will maybe briefly mention aliens, especially when we talk about Aleister Crowley. Stuff like cryptids probably won't come up a whole lot in this series, but it might. Then there's also, like the ancient foo-foo, mysterious, highly advanced, lost societies, like the people from Atlantis and Lemurians and all that stuff that comes out of Helena Blavatsky's work, and quickly spirals down into conspiracy theory BS and somehow ends in anti-Semitism almost all the time.
Yeah, that happens more often than you think. And let's just get this out of the way. We are anti-Semitism, pro-Semites, if you will.
In at least one notable case, we're just actually Semites.
Mhm.
Yeah, totally. I love everyone except those people that hate people. Screw them.
Mhm.
So we also have old religions and pantheons like the ancient Egyptian faith, Greek Hellenism, the Norse and Asir, if I'm pronouncing that
Yeah,
properly.
the Aesir.
so.
Aesir.
However, you do need to these days be careful of anyone claiming Odinism or Asatru. Those have sadly been co-opted into modern white supremacist groups in the U.S., which is a shame because, as with most faiths, the majority of believers are not assholes. Uh, I hope you will exercise caution, but give people the chance to be non-horrific humans.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and I'm just gonna throw this out there. If you are wearing the Thor's hammer around your neck or on your clothes, I'm like immediately skeptical of you.
Skeptical,
Hmm.
definitely.
Yeah, Thor's hammer, man. Like, name one thing the white supremacists haven't co-opted and then ruined. They ruin everything that they get their weird little hands on.
Weird little hands.
Yeah, I'm thinking. No, pretty much everything they touch turns to garbage. Follow Indiana Jones, punch Nazis.
Right in their face.
That is what we're going to send you all home to practice: punching Nazis. No,
Yeah,
I'm
don't
playing.
even
No,
listen
no,
to
no,
the
no,
next podcast unless you have punched at least one Nazi.
That's the, you must be this tall to ride a ride, and this tall is one Nazi punched.
no.
We'll be checking, okay?
We will.
We can
All
do
right,
that.
all right. Let's jump into our first steps here, and the first thing we're all gonna ask you to do, if you're following us on this journey and you're gonna be practicing this stuff with us, we want you to keep a journal. There are
Big
lots of
journal.
different things you can record in this journal. I have a really cool journal that is it says daydreams on one side and night dreams on the other, and you can flip it back and forth and write on the backs of pages and stuff.
Mine's a
Um,
crappy 5x8 spiral notebook.
you can also keep notes on the internet. I mean, if you're a Google Docs user, whatever works for you, man. Keep your journal next to your bed if possible. You can write stuff down as you wake up, especially if you're keeping dreams. Just scribble down notes to help you recall the dream in the morning, and then you can write it in more detail later on. Dream recording is important for a wide variety of stuff we'll do later on, including working on becoming lucid, but also a whole host of other stuff.
Sweet.
Your dream journal will seriously improve over time. Like at first, as you first start taking down notes on your dreams, you might remember little snippets or just kind of vague impressions. That's fine. Just write that all down. The longer you keep at it, the better you'll get at capturing that fragile little moment of remembering just as you wake up, and the clearer your dream journal will become.
hmm I'm going to say that the journaling aspect is probably the most important. I myself tried to teach myself how to lucid dream a while ago, and I never really got all that far with it. Probably because I skimped on the journal aspect. So learn from your elders. Write it down.
Definitely. Let's talk about tarot readings. Keep a journal if you are involved in a tarot reading. Write down if you do the reading or if someone else does. Write down what the spread looked like, what the results were, what cards came up, what directions they were facing, what shape you laid them down in. If you did the reading and are not familiar with the cards yet, what were your initial impressions just based on the imagery you saw before you actually look up the meaning of the cards?
hmm The Rider deck is a good place to start with that. There's a lot of badass artwork. Some of it you'll probably recognize. It's got that cool, like, 16th century, like, woodcut look to it, and it's got some supposed connections to Aleister Crowley, the Beast himself.
Yeah, that said, Crowley's deck is super awesome, but it's not a great starter deck. It's the imagery is pretty complex, and it's a really good deck for more advanced people. Rider Waite is the perfect starter deck, but
Mm.
I want to warn people, like, stay away from the other weirdo decks and theme decks that are out there. They don't really have the imagery down, and they're just kind of like uh, the result of capitalism and people trying to make money. They're awesome for their art, but they're not necessarily going to help you in your magic.
There's
They don't.
angelic ones out there. I think there was like a hipster tarot deck that I saw that was just a bunch of pictures of bearded dudes wearing plaid. It was not really what we're going for.
Yeah, I think I
No.
saw like a Kirby tarot deck at one point, and he's a cloud. Like, he's just a circle with a face. Like, he's not gonna help you get the symbolism
He's a
down, guys.
carnivorous
No.
marshmallow.
Yeah.
Spells. Keep a spell journal.
Did you cast any spells?
Did you see somebody else cast a spell?
Write down what happened. What did you feel? Did you feel something physical? Did you feel something emotional? Did you see anything out of the ordinary while it was happening? Did any of your other senses pick something up? What were any perceived results of the spell days or weeks or months afterwards? You kind of need to revisit this after a few days or weeks and see if there are any effects that you can look back on or any conclusions you can draw. Similar to spells, I want to talk about ceremonies. Kind of different from spells and rituals, more like a subset of rituals. Ceremonies are usually religious in nature. If you're following the Wiccan path, this might include the Sabbats. If you are Catholic, this is going to be Mass. Any ritual that you do that is for some divinity and not necessarily for your own benefit, that is a ceremony.
There's a lot of ceremony when it came to Freemasonry, and that's something that we're going to explore eventually.
Sure, but write that down.
Yeah,
hmm
absolutely. You also want to record odd experiences, synchronicities, coincidences, cases of deja vu.
Basically, glitches in the Matrix, man.
Man. But anytime you notice something that might have some significance, write it down. It's not so important to understand what the significance might be. There's going to be a lot of garbage in your journal by the end of this. That's fine. It's not even important to note why you noticed the thing. You might not know why you noticed the thing. You'll practice that. But get into the habit of writing it down anytime you notice, like capital N notice, anything unusual. Just kind of give
hmm
yourself permission to acknowledge that unexpected and the weird instead of letting the polite parts of your brain explain away whatever you might have experienced.
Yeah, we'll talk about this much more when we get into further episodes. But part of practicing the occult sciences is recognizing the magical, or to use the original etymology of the word, weird occurrences.
Etymology. I don't think it's a bug.
Etymology. Yeah, my bad.
It's all good.
The original etymology of the word weird occurrences in which are sorry, in what seems like mundane life.
I like the word weird. WYRD, weird. You gotta kind of let the letter Y sound like a U, sort of. It's like Old English or Saxon or something. It's like weird.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm
it's
pretty
pretty
sure
weird.
it's
Yeah.
It's
Saxon, but
pretty
yeah,
weird.
yeah. So revisit this section every so often and see if there are any trends or parallels you can draw. As far as formatting goes, we just gave you a long list of stuff that you'll want to keep notes on. But what we're gonna do is give you a format that you can use that somewhat will help you keep this all organized. This is personally what I do. The first thing I write down is date, time, and if you're into it, lunar cycle. If you don't care about what phase the moon's in, like whether it's waxing and waning and whether you do creative and destructive magic during different parts of the lunar cycle, ignore that. If you're into that, use it. Maybe you're not into that and you'll come to it later. It's fine, whatever. Location is important. Write down where you are. If I'm home, I usually just write what room I'm in, but if I'm like, say, visiting a friend in another state and I have my journal with me, I will also include like location, what state I'm in, or if for some reason I'm in Canada or wherever, write down that you're in this different place.
Yeah, why would you be in Canada?
Why wouldn't you be in Canada?
That's a fair
Fair point.
question. Why wouldn't you be in Canada?
Weather conditions are also important. Weather affects our psychology, and it might also have some other effects that we don't necessarily 100% know about. But I know definitely whether it's been a sunny day or a cloudy day or a rainy day or whatever, that affects like where my brain's at and might also affect the outcome of whatever it is I'm trying to do.
Sure, relative humidity affects the conductivity of the air.
Yeah, totally.
Whoa.
Physical feelings. Are you tired? Are you sick? Are you in pain? That stuff's important too. That's going to also affect your psychology, right? Your emotional state, whether you're happy, sad, angry, excited, indifferent, whatever. Rituals and activities performed. This is like what's the name of it, right? So, did you do the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram? Write it down.
If it's the first time you've done a ritual, write down more of the process. So it's not just like a random name. Like anybody can say they enacted the ritual of casual pastamancy. What does that mean, though? At
Right,
least
that's
one
the
point
next
in the
part.
journal, you should write it down.
Yeah, that's the next part is performance. So what was done, provide detail, like be specific. And you can be as specific as you want. More specificity is always better, but don't be so vague that you're going to look back on it in 5 days or a month or a year and be like, I don't know what that is at all.
I mean,
All
my
right.
standard for this is reproducibility, the same way for any experimental work. If someone else can look at this journal and do what I did, then I'm keeping good notes.
Yeah, I
And that
100% agree. 100%
Mhm.
agree.
and that brings us back to the scientific method.
Yeah, totally. And speaking of which, you also want to write down your results.
You do. That's really important to me. The concept of this being involved in the scientific method, I don't really identify as a practitioner first. I'm a skeptic first. And when what I'm doing has some of the familiar trappings of science and the methodology of science, it helps me get into the right headspace to do good ritual work.
Yeah. I mean, I don't believe anything. I also don't not believe anything. So there's that.
Sure.
Wow.
As far as keeping a journal, other authors and other groups have different recommendations, but this is what works for me. And ideally, you want to write these things down whenever you do or notice something specific. So if you do a ritual, write it down. If you had a dream, write it down. If you happen to have your journal on you and you're out on the bus and some kind of synchronicity or weird coincidence or deja vu happens, write it down. If not, try and remember it and take it home and write that down.
Like if you're on the bus and you're pretty sure that that dude's cockatiel just started speaking in tongues, you should probably write that down.
Or you could just be in Portland.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean,
That
that's
guy
where
might be
I'm at.
teaching his cockatiel to speak in tongues. That's fair. We shouldn't assume.
hmm
All right. Some people also recommend flipping your journal upside down and using the back pages as dream pages. My journal specifically is designed to do that, but you could do that with any regular old journal.
I do that with regular old journals because I'm a lefty and spiral bindings kind of suck. You still get ink smears on your hand, but if you're using the journal from back to front, you don't get weird stripes or ouchy bits on your hand from the spiral. They're more durable than composition books, so I still prefer that spiral binding. But I've got a pile of 5x8 spiral notebooks full of notes from work, notes from classes, notes from all sorts of stuff, all with the title on the cover and then the text filled in from the back.
Good point. And you all out there that don't have a physical journal, like I mentioned before, you can use Google Docs or hell, just scroll down your apartment wall like a flipping madman.
Probably paint over it when you leave the apartment. And that way, the apartment is still your demesne after you're gone. It makes scrying easier if your mark is still there and you're nosy about subsequent tenants. There's a -2 DC on your wisdom check. Disclaimer though, do not do this.
hmm
We should probably talk about the ethics of magic at some point.
I think we probably should, and maybe we'll do this as we move through topics. That might be one of the best ways to tackle the ethics of it.
Yeah, I kind of wonder if we should have some kind of like legal disclaimer for something like this in case like, somebody does have like a adverse reaction to some of this information.
Um, Yeah, I mean, you take your life and your consciousness into your own hands at all times. I feel like that should be like generally well known. But you do bring up a good point, and Manly P. Hall kind of talks about some of this stuff in some of his older books. Words to the Wise, I think, is the title that I originally read. There's a smattering of racist crap in there, kind of like Blavatsky's work, but also there's some content too where he has a lot of warnings. Lots of magicians tend to kind of go a little crazy,
A lot of
uh,
crazy.
or a lot of crazy. So if you really get into this stuff and you really believe it and you really put the energy and effort into it, you will have hallucinations. Whether those are apparition or madness or things that are really there, you will eventually come into contact with that. And it can screw up your whole life and other people's lives. And
Mhm.
Last podcast on the left went into that some.
yeah. They also talked about it a little bit on their episode on Ouija, a little bit too. So like, it's definitely a real thing. You really need to be learned before you practice, and don't just kind of dive headlong into things.
Yeah, it turns out people do some pretty wild stuff if they think it's a ghost telling them to do it.
Right. I mean, there's definitely a discussion to be had on the idea of black hat versus white hat in terms of practitioners, because it turns out cowboys and cybersecurity and magic are actually secretly all the same.
Oh my god, it's the rule of commonality again.
Definitely. With regard to scrying and marking, if you are into that sort of thing, maybe develop your own personal sigil or mark. We will talk about that in a future episode.
Yeah,
Uh,
definitely. And there's a thing called invoking the soul resonance, which we'll definitely get to, which involves creating a sigil for your the three aspects of your consciousness and merging them together and trying to unify like your higher self, your conscious self, and your subconscious self into one state. But we'll get to that at some
we
point.
will. What other journaling skills and methods might be valuable here? I want to go over a little more information might be helpful to track. Write down anytime you observe someone else perform a ritual, anytime you perform a ritual, but anytime you see someone performing a ritual, not necessarily a magical ritual necessarily, but any old ritual you observe, anytime you see a pattern of actions or behaviors, you want to write that down.
Think of it this way. Do your partner, your roommate, or your family members go through a specific set of actions when waking up or when going to bed?
Yeah, be sure to breathe heavily through your mouth and situate yourself uncomfortably close while observing.
This is key. If you get maced, it's working.
You'll be able to feel it, and people will appreciate the feedback. Just shriek, "It's working!" They'll get it.
hmm Other things could be: does somebody at work lay out their space in a very specific way? Do you or somebody you know always eat the same thing or have a traditional meal when you and your family or friends have a little semi regular get together?
Do you celebrate any holidays? What are things that you do when you celebrate?
I I admit I made a little holiday myself. Every fall around Halloween and usually before Thanksgiving, like around that kind of part of fall, get a bunch of friends together to have dinner and watch Over the Garden Wall. It's a very twee solstice party.
It's also Steak and Sex Day.
Ooh,
I've never been
today,
invited to a Twee solstice party.
man, you're. I don't know if you're missing out or not.
All right. Well, there's other stuff. Do you have a routine that you do before you settle down to work, either on a project or a hobby or really anything?
There are a lot of things that are classifiable as rituals. Basically, if a person performs any series of actions to achieve an objective, especially if this is done on any semi regular schedule or for an ongoing purpose, that is more than enough for it to go into your ritual journal. And later, we'll talk about how to use the rituals you've observed to build new rituals of your own.
Yeah, and I want to rephrase a thought I mentioned before for our listeners. Magic is not just about the little spells you do at home. It's a whole way of thinking, a way of life. Initially, you'll start out with small private practice, but eventually you'll want to think of everything as a ritual: the way you walk, the way you talk, the way you interact with the world.
Becoming a good practitioner involves building a set of habits, a set of tendencies, things you tend to look for and do. It'll make more sense when we start to discuss the actual doing of magic, but learning to spot rituals in the wild is a great first step in this.
hmm One thing about rituals, and especially noting them, is that you'll definitely see the interplay between the observation of a ritual and how that plays into your performance in said rituals.
Also, start observing the habits of actors and performance artists, like musicians and entertainment magicians. Everything they do is intentional. You have to start working your way in this direction. Life is a stage. We all wear masks. Start intentionally moving your way through the scene or the act of life instead of letting life move you.
Wear masks on purpose, is what we're saying. Be aware of what you're doing. And pick the pretty ones wherever possible.
Or pick ones depending on your needs at whatever point in time. That's chaos magic, though, and we'll get to that later on.
I'm gonna stick to the pretty masks.
Well, sometimes a good grotesque mask is important, especially if you spend a lot of time on the street at night, especially in the city.
Mm.
Now, I kind of want to go back to the word they used earlier, entertainment magicians. Felt a little bit pointed. Is that something that you want to go into at some point? Sort of your history with entertainment magicians?
I am a very, very amateur illusionist, if we'll say, and I'm actually trying to get back into it right now. Hopefully, I'll be doing a small show, kind of, sort of thing coming up. But yeah,
That's
Awesome.
pretty cool.
yeah.
All right, back to journaling. This is going to be a thing. We're just going to talk about journaling forever and ever. Write down anytime you change your mind about something, or you convince someone else to change their mind about something. You can write down anytime you truly challenge one of your beliefs, even if it stays the same after you look at it more deeply. Did you change your mind because you gained new information? Did someone convince you of something?
Did you see or read something on the news that made you rethink something you believe?
Did you get into an argument and notice you were confused or uninformed about something important to you? Maybe someone made you, somebody made an argument that you felt was wrong, but you didn't know how to challenge the argument at the time.
I'm going to recommend that you guys take a look at an ebook called Rationality From AI to Zombies by Eliezer Yudkowsky. The first two sections of that ebook talk about understanding beliefs and how to actually change your mind. It turns out changing what you believe to be true is really, really difficult. If you're going to
hmm
get serious about understanding how to manipulate what you believe and why other people believe what they believe, these essays are super helpful. They're written with a very scientific mindset, and they closely follow rationalist philosophy. So they might not be helpful to everybody, but for me, I learned a great deal about how our brains are wired and how to short circuit a lot of my own belief structures. Um,
Interesting.
in retrospect, this is almost certainly not why these essays were written, but that is what I gained from them. Take from that what you will.
hmm
Yeah, there's also Timothy Leary's eight circuit model of consciousness, which I actually recently learned a little bit about reading this book called Quantum Psychology by Robert Anton Wilson. There's a lot of discussion in there as well in a lot of Leary's work about re imprinting your circuits or the aspects of your personal psychological makeup and how it can be done. But like I've said, it's not an easy task, and if you're not careful, it can be quite dangerous. It often involves the use of psychedelics, but proper and intense meditative techniques can be used to do that. And there's a few other methods, but again, like that's something we'll get into much later on.
We will.
Yeah, and we're saying these are when we say intense meditation, we mean intense. Like if you start to hallucinate, that means you're doing it right.
Means you're like
Yeah.
halfway there.
Yeah.
But to come back, changing your mind and abandoning established belief structures are extremely important concepts in chaos magic. And learning to recognize this is important for later analysis because you'll need to practice changing your mind and your beliefs.
And just totally adopting other personas altogether is kind of a thing in chaos magic, or like putting on a mask and becoming a, you know, theoretically possessed by a god or deity or demon or something for a period of time. It's kind of like acting. Just be slow with it, learn a lot about it before you try and do it, and be careful. You don't Heath Ledger yourself.
Yeah, pour one out, Heath.
The Joker claimed another victim himself. Namaste.
Rest in peace. With that, I think we're just about out of time. Next week, we're going to dig a little deeper and start talking about this thing called gnosis and altered states of consciousness. And then we'll leave you with some visualization and meditation techniques to practice and play with. In episode 3, we're probably looking at divination, because divination is really important for kind of prep work for some of the rituals and practices you might do. And then from there, it looks like we're on to writing your own magic and what rituals really look like, and we'll see how far we get. Anyway, until next time, our purpose is done and the circle is broken. Go back to the world enriched in knowledge and alight with laughter, at least a little bit more than when we started.
So mote it be.
So mote it be.
So mote it be.
Thrice bound and done. Until next time, listeners, fools out.